harmonious strength training. And what the difference between harmonious strength training and any other kind of training is that we are using our own bodies to provide resistance. It's a self-resistance method of training. We use, sometimes gravity helps too, of course, but we mostly use muscle antagonists to work against the agonists, or sometimes they call them protagonists. And that basically gives us the ability to train both sets of muscles, and they actually balance each other out. If one of them is initially stronger than the other, well, that's going to create some imbalance or misalignment, and we want them to be more or less equally strong, so we want to bring them to balance by engaging one against the other. The stronger one will provide greater resistance to the weaker one, so the weaker one actually will have a greater opportunity to catch up, to train up. The weaker one won't be able to provide as much resistance to the stronger antagonist, and therefore the stronger one will not get as much training, and that will create opportunity for those two sets of muscles to find balance. And that's not all. We also use the principle of integration. Instead of isolating a particular muscle and just working on that muscle, like a lot of people, for example, would say, I'm going to do biceps curl. So they just grab a dumbbell or something, and they start lifting the dumbbell up and down for the biceps. Isolated biceps, they lock the elbow or put it on something and basically make it so that only one singular muscle is being trained. What we're doing is we actually engage muscle groups, and sometimes these include quite a few different muscles. So obviously, even in this training, you would also be training your flexors of the fingers because you would be holding a dumbbell. Well, we can do that even if we're providing self-resistance. So for example, when we are training biceps against the triceps, we can still imagine that we are grabbing something or squeezing something. So we can actually train the muscles, both flexors and extensors of the fingers. And speaking of which, most people hardly ever train extensors. Everybody wants to have a strong grip, but that's not enough. It's also just as important to be able to open your hand. And to open your hand, you need to engage the extensors. And if extensors are weak, as compared to flexors, something really funny is going to happen. They are going to be sore, because they're constantly struggling against much stronger flexors. So the flexors may be operating at just a relatively relaxed level of muscle tone, but the extensors will be constantly chronically tense. And where there is tension, there's going to be weakness. In other words, they will more likely to get injured or compromised in some other way. For example, playing tennis. Often people complain about tennis elbow because the extensors of the wrist got involved in the backstroke, and they were not trained enough. They were not strong enough. So just a little bit extra effort actually put the muscle into a spasm. So the tennis elbow is not really about the elbow joint, it's about the muscles that start from the elbow go down to the lower arm. And so we want to train all kinds of muscle groups more or less simultaneously because we're busy people. We don't have a lot of time to train each and every muscle singularly, so we want to work with them more or less wholesale. Let's see how we can start with something really simple. Okay. We're going to start with the movement that I already demonstrated, flexing and extending the arm at the elbow to train biceps and triceps. But obviously we are busy people, and we don't have time to do it with one arm and then switch to the other arm. Let's do it on both sides simultaneously. So how do we do it? Well, just imagine that you are holding something heavy, and now you start lifting it. As you're lifting it, you're creating resistance with the triceps, the muscles that are responsible for extension of the arm and elbow. And then, as you bring the imaginary heavy object down, you are contracting the triceps, lengthening the biceps. Lengthening, but still creating resistance with the biceps. This is what we call the eccentric phase of movement. So a concentric phase of movement is when you are contracting the muscle and it shortens. The eccentric phase of the movement is when you're still trying to contract the muscle, but it's actually lengthening. And when you do that, something really cool happens. The central nervous system that sends signals to the muscle fibers, those signals don't trickle down to the muscle fibers all at the same time. Often they get kind of rerouted, they get on a loop somewhere, or get misdirected and end up going to the wrong muscle altogether. Often they take this sweet time to trickle down to the muscle fibers, so much so that after the workout you may feel tense. If you feel tense, it means the muscle is still receiving signals of contraction. Because muscles are not stupid, and I'm going to just hold tension for no good reason. If they're receiving these signals, it means this communication channel is not quite clear. And so those signals have to jump through a bunch of hoops to make their way to the muscle fiber. What the eccentric phase of movement does, it actually kind of clears the communication channels, helps the communication to become more immediate and more direct, and that's exactly why greater percentage of muscle fibers will actually get involved. What's also cool about this practice is that you can change the position of the hands easily, because why not? It gives you the ability to train slightly different parts of the muscle. So you can probably feel how the biceps is working slightly differently, and so does the triceps. How about pronation? So this is supination. We're going to try the reverse of that, which is called pronation. And you can probably feel how different it feels. Now that's not all. We can go further. For example, lifting imaginary heavy weight above our heads, and then bring it back behind our head. That's right. So now the triceps goes into full range of motion. And then lifting the heavy object from behind your head. And let's see how we can bring it back down in front. And as we're bringing it down, we are going to go further back. So now the biceps is lengthening all the way. The triceps is in a shortened position. So basically we're going through the full range of motion of biceps and triceps. Again, lifting this heavy weight above our heads, and then bringing it up behind the back of the head. Just doing this a few repetitions already will probably feel like, wow, this is pretty intense. And that's because we are not taking any time to rest. When you lift weights, there is a relatively short amount of time when you're contracting the muscles and lifting that weight. And then you are more or less relaxing this muscle, letting the weight drop down, and there is a point in time when you're resting. Right now, we are not resting. We are moving through full range of motion without taking the slightest moment for the muscles to rest. So, in a sense, it gives them not only an opportunity to become stronger, it also trains their endurance, which is one of the few, if not the only, exercise methods that actually trains both strength and endurance in one sitting.
What I'm noticing with this is there's a very different sensation to, like I can feel the muscles getting fatigued. But as they're getting more fatigued, in a strange sense, rather than like when I work out with weights, there's more of a tenseness. I actually feel like a signal to relax. Like
there is no physiological signal to relax, but yes, the muscle is much more likely to relax once it's thoroughly tired.
Right. Yeah.
So that's kind of a fascinating thing. After this training, you will actually be able to relax instead of feeling tense.
Right.
And also the following day or in a few hours, you will not have this sensation like, oh my God, I can't move because they overtrained.
Right.
Why? Well, because overtraining happens to be the standard operating procedure in most strength training protocols. Why? Because they rely on hypertrophy of the muscles. So basically, you put the muscle fiber in such a strenuous exercise that it starts tearing, and as it tears, obviously it's going to hurt, and then it will have to recuperate and build up and restore itself. And that process of restoration can make that muscle fiber stronger. But in the process of restoration also it's not going to feel great. And you probably will not be able to train because it's going to hurt too much. So that's why usually people don't train the same sets of exercises every day because they just wouldn't be able to. What we're doing is we're not relying on building strength by breaking down the muscle fibers. We're relying on engaging higher percentage of already existing muscle fibers in training and in action. Most people don't use the full percentage of muscle fibers when they try to contract a specific muscle. In most cases, it's going to be 10, maybe 15. In some cases, maybe 20% of the full capacity or full number of muscle fibers that are firing all at the same time. That means that the full capacity of the muscle could be a lot greater than what the person is actually capable of doing, simply because the signals don't make their way to muscle fibers that don't fire. Why don't they fire? Well, there are some reasons. For example, one of the reasons might be that if the complete 100% muscle fibers would fire all at once, they could actually tear the tendon connecting the muscle to the bone. So there is a reason why it doesn't happen. And we're not going to train to engage 100%. But we're going to bump this percentage point to slightly higher, maybe 25, maybe 30%, maybe 40%. Seems like if you're just going from 10 to 20, it's not a big deal, but it's actually giving you twice as much power. Let's see how we can go from the movement as if you are lifting something like a heavy object in front of you. But now, instead of bending arms, we're going to keep the arms straight. And we're going to engage the deltoids. And the beautiful thing about it is that you are not going to hurt your back. If you lift a heavy object with the arms in front of you straight like this, you can easily throw your back out of alignment and you will need a chiropractor to adjust you. Or you will have back pain. In this case, nothing like that's going to happen because there is no heavy weight. It's just the weight of your arms and imaginary weight that you're lifting, but simply that imagination is just a matter of engaging the resistance of the lats. Lats, posterior deltoids, and other muscles that are responsible for pushing arms down against the deltoids. So we're lifting arms up, more or less straight. In my practice, I always suggest to not straighten the arms and other limbs completely, like locking the elbows. Just slight bend, maybe just a degree or two, is better than locking it completely. Again, we can experiment with change in angle. So, for example, we can move the arms up by changing the angle slightly. We can imagine that we're holding this heavy object or objects in our hands in a slightly different position. And we can change its position on the fly. So basically, this is the beautiful thing about this type of training. You're not holding onto the barbell and just lifting it like this. Obviously, it has to be held like so because it's a piece of metal. If it's an imaginary heavy object, it can be malleable. It can be any size, any shape, and it's up to you how heavy to imagine it to be. And as a matter of fact, you can even change the weight of this imaginary heavy object on the fly as well. So as you're doing this exercise, your muscles will start getting tired. And as they're getting tired, you will feel like, oh my God, I can't lift the same weight anymore. Now, if it was the exact same heavy weight, for example, a dumbbell, you wouldn't be able to lift it after a few repetitions. However, because it's an imaginary weight, you can adjust its weight to continue being able to lift your arms, just simply gradually reducing that weight, and actually may enter the aerobic regime of training, which is remarkable because there are very few types of training where you can train for both anaerobic regime of work of muscle, where you burn ATP stored inside the muscle fibers. On the other side is aerobic regime, where you actually get oxygen from breathing, and the oxygen allows the metabolism in the muscles to basically provide some energy for the muscle to contract. But what we're doing is we are engaging these muscles for long enough so that you actually feel like, I need to breathe more intensely. As you start breathing more intensely, that means that you are transitioning from the anaerobic regime, where you're not really relying that much on oxygen, to the aerobic regime, where you do rely on oxygen brought to you by the bloodstream from the lungs. As we're doing these movements, let's see if we can make them also not linear, but slightly more circular. So the arms can go down on sides, come back in front, come back down on the sides again. That's another really cool part of our training, where we look not only at the harmonious strength training, but in general at harmonious culture movement, which is often associated with circular rather than linear start-stop quality of movements. And another really neat thing is going to happen. As you notice how you're breathing more intensely, you can synchronize the movements of your body with the physiological action of breathing. So obviously here it's easier to inhale, so that's what you do. Do what the body wants it to do. Here, for example, as the arms come down, you exhale. And if you feel like this is too slow of a pace, well, you can speed up the movement of your arms, so basically you match the movement of your arms and breathing rate so that they work in sync. Now, if we can do movement upwards in front of the body and down on the side, how about we reverse this? Now, there are other parts of the deltoid muscle besides the anterior deltoid that need to be trained. And often folks who exercise kind of omit or skip some of the practices that require engaging different parts of the same muscle group in training, which may be another reason why only a small fraction of the muscle group actually engages.
I have a question about using our imagination to facilitate muscle contraction.
Huh?
So with using imagination rather than an actual object, how is that affecting the increase of signals that you are sometimes talking about, like that more of the muscle tissue is getting engaged? What is the relationship in how that is affecting that?
Yeah, you can engage in all kinds of interesting imagery. For example, you can imagine trying to rescue a child from a car wreck. And you imagine lifting the car up in the air.
Yeah.
There are instances when people actually have done it in their real life, which seem to be, how is it possible? Like, how can a person actually lift the whole car? Well, it's because they used to use only 10% of their full capacity. So in other words, they actually have 10 times as much strength as they used to think they had. Well, how do we tap into that resource? Well, this is one of the ways to do it. We engage our imagination, and we can put ourselves in a psychological state where we feel like, oh, this is life and death kind of situation. We have to do this. For example, imagine that you're a rock climbing and you're climbing the wall, and of course you wouldn't want to climb the wall with so much tension. But for the sake of exercise, you can imagine that you are climbing the wall and you're using a fair amount of tension. And if you let go of this wall or you stop climbing, you're going to fall to death. Well, which happened to me on more than one occasion. I literally had rock climbing accidents or incidents when I fall off the rock face and survived by sheer miracle. And so this kind of movement, again, engages a number of muscle groups. And you can imagine that your torso also starts getting involved. Because as you're pulling your arms down, your lats and your pectoralis muscles are involved. You may even engage your abs, you may even engage the muscles of the back and other parts of the torso. Very nice. And so as you climb up, for example, to the top of this rock formation that you just climbed up, you can push up, kind of like you see as you're getting out of the swimming pool. You put your hands on the edge of the swimming pool and you just push up. Or you can imagine that you're doing chin-ups, but then you do a muscle up. You just literally get on top of the bar. Well, that's how I learned how to do muscle up, by the way. I literally just imagined what it would be like to do the chin up and then just bring my whole body up further on top of the bar that I held. And then I would do it again. And I would do it again. And I did this enough times so that later, a few days later, I came to the chin up bar and I just did the muscle up like there was no problem.
So that raises an interesting question in this Harmonious Strength challenge that I'm doing.
Yeah.
Because we've talked also about like how to measure certain metrics of my progress. Mm-hmm. We have a variety of ways we're doing that already. Right. But this brings to mind that in my practice, if I, like you're saying, imagine doing very specific exercises and do them for a certain period, and then, or rather, like, say it's a chest press.
Okay.
Go into the gym. How many can I do at what weight?
Right.
And then go home and imagine doing it mm-hmm. the way that you're describing, and then see, in 2 weeks' time, how much stronger am I at that specific exercise? That would be an interesting way of checking that.
Absolutely.
And the same with either the pull-ups or So that's really great. I'm going to add that to one of the methodologies and then test that out.
For sure, yes, that's a very good point. That it's great to have some way of measuring and comparing the results of your activities before the training versus after the training. How long do you need to train to see the results? Usually it's going to take a few weeks, maybe a couple of months, to start noticing significant results. And by significant, I mean going from being able to do 20 push-ups to doing 30 push-ups, for example. Or being able to do a push-up and a handstand. Let's say just come to the wall, toss your feet up on the wall and do a handstand push-up. So if you can do it, for example, first, don't hurt yourself. I don't want you to collapse and hurt yourself trying to do the handstand push-up. Just imagine what it would be like to do one. Yes, your whole body weight is being lifted. And if you want to, you can do this again. And again, lift your whole body weight. Or you can imagine that you can do this 3 times in a row. That's right. You can even go for the 4th time if you feel like it. This is an exercise that obviously engages triceps, the deltoids, the upper pecs, and a few other muscle groups. essentially, it's a great test of strength. If somebody can do a handstand push-up, well, that's a pretty formidable strength. I can do this type of push-ups relatively easily because I do this kind of training. One-arm push-ups, whatever. It's just another type of exercise that I don't do every day. I just simply use them as a testing ground or a measuring stick, so to speak. What we also do is sometimes we use measuring devices. Like, for example, next time maybe you can bring that measuring device where you can squeeze it, and it will give you a certain reading.
It measures pressure. Yeah.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we need. We need to measure pressure. For example, in this exercise, when we bring the hands together and we squeeze them, not as hard as you can. So if you can squeeze, for example, and get like 100 pounds. Okay, well, don't do 100 pounds today. Go to 75. 75, maybe 80 pounds max. And then, not just standing and squeezing like it's an isometric exercise. No, we are going to move. And we're going to make circular movements while still squeezing the hands at more or less the same level of pressure. It's up to you how large to make these circles. What we will notice is that it's possible that somewhere along the circular movement, it's easier to press, and in some other places of the circle, it's not as easy to press or squeeze the hands. Which actually tells you that there are some parts of the muscle group, the pectoralis muscle group, the muscles of the chest, that are stronger, and others that are not as strong. Obviously, you can synchronize your breathing also with this movement, so you exhale as the hands go down, and exhale as the hands go up. You can also reverse, do the same number of repetitions in opposite direction. This is a wonderful way to engage and train different parts of the pecs. The thing about the pecs is that they consist of quite a number of the different strands or fibers. Some go up to the clavicle bone, others go to the top of the sternum, to the middle part of the sternum, to the lower part of the sternum, and some go all the way down to the ribs. And so they're like a fan fanning out from the armpit. Some of them may be stronger than others. We want to find out which ones are not as strong and give them some exercise. So as you are moving through this circular movement, you may notice that there are some that are not as strong, or afterwards you may feel like, well, that part of the circle was a little bit tougher. So you can slow down or stop, or play a little bit at that point along the circle, and see where else you can find any area where it's not as easy. For example, I find a little bit not as easy here, so fine. I'll try to work on this side. You can also go from side to side at the same elevation of the hands. Wherever you find some weakness or less strength, you can just simply identify that that is the part of the pecs that needs more training.
And I can also feel it's working in many other areas, so everything is working together. And so, I guess the reason for calling it harmonious strength is that muscles are getting stronger and learning to work better together. Exactly. No muscle works in isolation.
Precisely. Yeah, isolation is not an optional, but it's not the most functional, most optimal way to train muscles. And the beautiful thing about it is that when you perform any kind of activity in your daily life or commit some action with your muscles in a situation where you need some strength, you are not going to be able to rely on the strength of just one singular muscle. You need to compensate for a lack of strength perhaps in one part of the body by recruiting other parts. What we're doing is we realize that's how we function as humans. instead of saying, oh, that's compensation mechanism, no good, we need to stop doing that. We actually say, no, compensation mechanism is not the worst thing that could happen. We need to be able to compensate effectively. But still, we want to train that part that is not so strong, so we don't have to compensate as much.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a neat, elegant way to stop fretting about compensation. Stop isolating muscles and actually start engaging them more harmoniously. Now let's see how we can do something for the muscles antagonists of the pecs. What we did just a moment ago was working one side of the pectoralis against the other side of the pectoralis. Basically, two sides of the chest muscles work against each other, which is a great idea because for many people who are right-handed, one side is going to be stronger than the other. Left-handed obviously will have the same in reverse. How about the muscles antagonists of pecs? Because if we train pecs all the time, like a lot of people do in the gym, they just go gung-ho, for example, training the muscles that they see in a mirror. But then the muscles that they don't see on the other side of the body, on the back side, don't get enough training, and they're going to get weak. So often people end up with...
Or even like this, it contracts them down like this.
Right. And then there's going to be stretching of the muscles of the back that are weak, and as they stretch, they start hurting. Obviously, hurting is not a sign of strength, it's a sign of weakness. What do we need? We need to give them some strength. How do we give them strength? Well, one of the easiest ways to do it is to interlock the fingers in front of you and do similar movements that we've just performed, but instead of squeezing the hands together, we're going to pull them apart, but resist with the fingers. So not allowing the hands to be pulled apart. We're going to move them in circular manner. And now we are training the muscles antagonists of the pecs, called trapezius, and rhomboid to some extent. And again, it's up to you how large to make this circle. You can experiment with smaller or larger circles. But the idea is that you are engaging this muscle in the back, upper back, that is also like a fan. It also fans out from the shoulder blade, up the neck, goes all the way to the back of the skull, and connects to each and every spinous process of the vertebrae in the thoracic part of the spine, going down the spine. Basically, not only the upper back but also the mid back is also covered by this muscle, the trapezius. After a few revolutions in one direction, let's see how you can switch the way that the fingers are interlocked. For many people, there is only one comfortable way to lock the fingers like this. Well, this is an opportunity to kind of break through that stereotype. And now we're going to move in the opposite direction. Again, inhaling as the hands go up, exhaling as the hands go down. So if you feel like you need more intense breathing, you need to speed up the rotation of your hands so that you basically match the circulation of your breath with the cycles that, of the circles that you're making in front of you. And you can feel how those muscles probably are like, wow, what are you doing to us? Because they're not very strong, they're not trained sufficiently, so just giving them a little bit of exercise already puts them in a situation where they're like, wow, that's a lot of workout to do. That's an invitation to do more of that workout, but being very mindful. So we are really training ourselves in mindfulness, and not just talking about this big buzzword that's popular nowadays, but actually embodying mindfulness. How do we embody mindfulness? We want to maintain awareness of the edges of a comfort zone. In this context, if you go gung-ho and overuse those muscles that you're not used to training, they are going to complain. They basically will be overused or abused. And what do the abused muscles say? They scream at you. They say, "What the hell did you just do to me?" And that comes off as a form and signal of pain. We don't want to cause ourselves that kind of grief, because that will actually compromise our ability to train tomorrow. We want to train only to reach the edge of the comfort zone, and if you feel like your comfort zone is kind of shrinking, in other words, you getting tired, tone down the intensity. That's a beautiful thing. You can, on the fly, adjust the intensity of your exercise as you continue moving. So you may not be pulling as hard, pulling the hands apart, but you still are doing these movements and you're still training. And as you're getting more tired, you can drop the intensity further and basically operate still on the edge of your comfort zone, so that you're not running away from the challenge, but you're not overwhelming your muscles with too much challenge. And so that basically is the intelligent and very smooth way to train, where you don't create this kind of spurts of activity where you just go gung-ho and then you have to lie for a few days because you can't move. That actually is what we call weekend warrior syndrome. And we don't want that, thank you very much. We don't want to be weekend warriors. We want to be full-time warriors. So this is the full-time warrior training. I hope you enjoyed it. We will continue this exploration further in our future broadcasts and our future videos. Thank you, Christian, very much.